We all know that beer is four things: malt, water, hops, and yeast. But you may ask yourself, yeast? What exactly is yeast? What does it do in beer? Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. Yeast is a eukaryote, a unicellular fungal organism. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. It's a member of the fungal kingdom and is a thing unto itself. The word comes from the Old English yeast. And although they had a word for it, they really didn't know what it was. Yeast just means the action of foaming or frothing. It wasn't until 1857 when Louis Pasteur proved that yeast was the organism that turned sugar into alcohol that we knew what was really going on. Most people experience yeast as a beige powder used to make bread dough rise. It's important to remember that it is a living organism, and those granules that you see in that beige powder, those aren't yeast cells. They're much, much smaller than that. So we have to coax them back into life out of that powder to work. And in order to do that, we have to give them the right conditions. The right temperature, the right concentration of water, the right pH, and the right nutrient sources. When yeast is first added to unfermented beer, it goes to work doing what everybody wants to do: reproducing. In fact, the yeast pitched into a beer initially usually doesn't survive all the way to the end of the fermentation. It merely reproduces until it reaches culture strength. Culture strength is about 10 to 20 million living yeast cells per milliliter. Really, per tiny amount. 10 to 20 million live cells. When it hits that concentration, the yeast immediately stops reproducing and switches over to alcohol fermentation. Scientists still don't know how they signal this or why they do it all at exactly the same time, but they do. It does that by budding daughter cells right off the outside of its outer integument. You can see on this picture the little scars that the yeast has had from daughter cells budding off. Now, just a little detour here. You may have heard of top fermenting and bottom fermenting yeast. The truth is, all yeast is middle fermenting because that's where all the good sugar is. Top fermenting are usually ale yeasts, and the reason why they're called that is because they ferment at a warmer temperature, which makes them make more carbon dioxide more quickly than lager yeast. That results in a frothy head on top of the beer and a lot of activity. Top fermentation. Lager yeast, on the other hand, is quieter, more sedate. It's the bookish type. It ferments quietly, doesn't have that enormous froth on top, and it tends to settle out very nicely in the bottom after time. Some people have called it bottom fermenting, but it's fermentation, neither bottom nor top. One of the cool things about yeast is its diversity. 70% of a beer's flavor comes straight from yeast. In fact, you could take a batch of beer and split it into two. Add one yeast to part of it and a different yeast to the other, say a Hefeweizen versus a lager yeast. And when you tasted them at the end of the day, you would swear they were different beers made by different people in different places. That's how profound the impact of yeast is on the outcome of beer's flavor. Once yeast is finished fermenting all of the sugar, the brewery will turn the temperature down on the tank, and that will cause the yeast to go inactive and dormant and fall out of suspension, leaving delicious, clear beer. Most breweries will harvest yeast from the bottom of their fermenters to pitch it into a new batch. This is not only economical because yeast is not inexpensive. It's also really good brewing technique because you can harvest an enormous batch of yeast and get a good, clean, thorough fermentation going on the next batch. Yeast is a beautiful thing. Because of its activity, we can enjoy so many different delicious beers. From a crisp, clean lager to a big, malty, hoppy IPA. From a Kvike to a Hefeweizen to a Baltic Porter. All of these are possible through our funky little friend, yeast.
Okay, this cut, I do the part I forgot, okay.
And it's Jordan, finding a script. Hello. Hello. That's not the script.
Out of my shot, camera.
Get out of my